Hey guys, welcome in this new tutorial. So today I want to show you how to create a stills for a cosmetics brand. So this tutorial is quite easy for the technical side. It's more focused on the compositions, lighting, textures and rendering. So here we are. I'm starting a new blank scene in Houdini. So let's start by adding a new geometry node. So here we can rename it something like Summer Fridays R&D. And here I can dive inside, I can add a file node because I've already modeled my geometry. So I can't provide this one because it's client file. So of course I can't provide the client's file for you guys. So here I will click on P and I will open my geometry. So you can use your own, of course, or you can remodel the geometry if you want. So here I can click on this object and I can go into Heap Geo and I have my model right here. So this is the geometry I've used. So now we can add a match size node to resize our geometry because I've modeled this one on Cinema 4D. And here for the match size node, we can keep the target size at 1 and we can click on scale to fit. So in that case, the model will be resized in a box with 1 dimension like this. So now let's add a new list to specify this is the base start for our geometry. So let's rename it something like base geo. So now we can remove the caps. So we can see we have the caps here. So we can remove this part of the geometry to keep only the tube here. So to do that, we can add a blast node. So here with the blast node, you can see we have 3 components for our geometry. So we have the base, the cap, and a small inner part. So here we can remove the caps and we can keep everything else. So here we can add another null to specify this is the start point for the compositions. And also we will create some fake fluids because we won't use any fluid simulation, but I will show you a good tricks to create some fake fluid effects for these specific scenes. Here we go, we have our starting point here, so we can add a transform node. So in my case, I will use 3 transform nodes because I will use 3 geometry with 3 different colorways. And here the idea of the compositions is to get a composition from the top left to the bottom right here. So we will use a wide camera angles and we will create the lighting based on this composition, so from the left to the right here. So here I will create one transform, another one, and another one. So in that case, we have 3 transform nodes here. So maybe we can go into the object panel here and we can create our camera. So let's add a camera here. So we can go into the view and here we can define the resolution. So maybe in my case, I will go for the format 4:5. So let's type 1080 by 1350 here. And here for the focal length, I will go with something quite wide. So let's use 16 instead of 50. So in that case, we have wide camera angle. So we can go into camera view here and we can split our screen. If you want, you can go into camera view into this one, and into this one, you can just place the camera where you want. So here I will just change the position of my camera like this, and you can see we have quite wide angle camera here. So now I can go into my object here, and now we can define a cool positions and a cool composition for our 3 tubes here. So here we will use 2 transform nodes for each tubes. The first one is to define a cool positions and a cool rotation at the center of our scene here. So for now we have the tube into the center of our scenes. And the second transform node we will add is to position the tube correctly onto our scene based on the composition we need to create. So here let's start by adding new transform node. And we can copy and paste it for each individual tube here. So now we can create a group for each tube. So let's add a group node. And here for the group node, we can keep it on primitive. You can put a star here if you want. And here you can rename the group name. For example, we can rename this one tube mid. This one will be our tube top. And this one will be our tube bottom. So now we can merge everything together. So we can select all the group here and plug them into the merge. And now we are in camera view into the left part on the screen here, and into this part we are in 3D view. So in that case, I can place my tube correctly with these panels, and I will use a different transform node to place them correctly. So here we go for the first one. So maybe we can start with the top one. So I will use the second transform node first. And here I will change the position and the rotation with these little icons. And here you can switch from global to local by pressing M on the keyboard. So here we are in local. So you can see I can change the rotation of my tube like this, and the rotations handles will change like this one. And if you want to go into global based on the scene, you can just press M on the keyboards. And you can see now we are in global. So here you can just make a rotation based on the y-axis of the scenes. So here I will reset everything. So here I will be focused on the top tube. and I will change my handles to the local part. So here you can press M to change it to the locals. And maybe I will go into my camera and I will change the position on the Z-axis. So here I can select my camera and I can go for maybe something like this. So now I can go into the object, and here I will change the position of my tube to find the cool angles, and maybe I can start with this one, and you can just change it as you want. So maybe I will go for something like this. And here you can switch from local to global by pressing M, and you can change the position, for example, on the global Y axis, and you can change the rotation like this. You can switch again to the local, and here you can just find a cool position for your specific object. So maybe we can go for something like this for now for the first one. And here, if you want, you can use the first transform node to change the rotation on the Y-axis, for example. And here you can change it like this. So it won't break everything. So you can just play with the first transform to add some little adjustment to your tubes. So here, maybe we can go like this for the first one. So now I will be more focused on the middle tube. So here I can click on this one and I will place it correctly. So maybe I can put this one in pink. So in that case, I can get the visualizations of the tube into the scene here. So now I will be more focused on this one. I can click on this, and now I can do absolutely the same. So I will place it correctly and switching from local to global to find a cool position for my tubes. So maybe this position is quite cool for the middle part, and make sure you don't have any intersection between your different tubes here. And like before, if you want, you can go into the first transform node and you can make little adjustment, for example, on the rotation on the Y-axis. So maybe we can go for something a bit more like this. And here we can make some adjustments if you need. So now we can visualize our sweet tube here, and we can be more focused on the last one. So here I will just change the position of my third tube, which is the bottom one. And here, like before, I will select the second transform node first. I will switch from local to globals, and here I will make little adjustment with the first transform just after that. So here I will find a good position for the last one. And now I can adjust the global transform of my last tube here. So I can select the transform, and here I can change the rotation on the Y-axis. So maybe we can go for something like this. And here we can make some adjustment also for the first and the second one. So here we can go a bit like this for this one. And for this one, we can go into the opposite side like this. And I think it's quite good. So here, make sure you don't have any intersection between the three tubes here. And of course, you can make some adjustment if you need. So now we can add a transform node. And here we can make some little adjustment if you want for our sweet tube here. So I can go back into the perspective here. And maybe we can select the transform node here, and we can make some very little adjustment here into the rotation on the x-axis, into the y-axis. So I think I have a good starting point here, so we can add a null to specify this is the end of our transformation. So let's rename it something like tube transform. So here we want to add a null node for each individual tube here. So in that case, for the rendering part later, we can use a puzzle mat to make some adjustment in post-production for each individual tube here. So to do that, we can use a blast node, and we can blast our tube based on the group we have created just before here. So maybe for the first one, we can select the middle tube here. So we can select the group, so tube mid, and we can click on delete non-selected. So we can copy and paste this one. So we can just replace it for the tube top. So here we can replace the group. And we can duplicate one more time for the bottom tube. So here we have another blast, and we can select our bottom tube part. So here we can select this one and remove the top, and we can click on delete non-selected here. So now we have two parts on our geometry. So we have the tube, and we have a little part into the inner part of the top part of the tube here. So let's add the blast node to remove the inner part. So here with the blast, we can select the inner here. We can click on delete non-selected, and you can see the inner part look like this. So this will be merged with the fake fluid. So in that case, we can get the same material for this inner part and the fluid. because the inner part of the tube here is composed of fluid. So this is the reason why I just remove that, and later I will merge this one with the fluid. So here I can remove the delete non-selected. So in that case, we can keep only our tube without the inner part. So we can duplicate this blast node here for each individual tube. So in that case, we can keep only the tube for each part here, and we can add a null to specify this is the end and to specify this is ready for rendering. So we can rename it something like render mid. We can duplicate our null and we can just rename it something like render top and render bottom. So now let's add a null here to specify this is the start of our fake fluid effect. So we can rename it something like go fluids. So here the idea is to create some group with the inner part of our tube here. So we need to create some edge group in the inner part right here. And then we can convert this edge group to line. We will create some points, and then with this point we can create some line to create some fluid effect, and later we can create geometry based on the line with a sweep node. And the sweep node is very versatile because we can just define a profile with the ramp, and I think it's very, very nice to create this kind of stuff procedurally. So here the first step is to create 3 group nodes. So we will create some group for each tubes. So here let's create the first group, and for the group we need to change the type from primitive to edges, and here for the base group you can just select this icon, and here you can select your edge. So you can double click to select the full loop here. We can click on shift and we can select another one here, and you can press enter to create our group. So we have our first group for our first tube here. So you can see the group is in orange here. So now we can do absolutely the same for the middle part. So we can add another group node. For this one, we can just do absolutely the same. So you change the group type from primitive to edges, and here you can click on this little icon to select the edge you want to isolate. So this one and maybe this one. Click on enter and do absolutely the same for the last one. Create a group node. And here is absolutely the same for the last tube. So we can change the type, and here we can select the edges. Click on enter, and now we have our 3 groups. So you can make the node in red to specify this is not procedural. So if you change your geometry into the input, you need to recreate the 3 group here. So now we can create our first line for the first tube here. So we will create all the node into this first part, and in that case you can just copy the node here and paste it for the group 2 and the group 3. So you can see it will be more easier to do like this. So let's start by adding the node labs edge group to curve. So here we just need to select the group created here. So in my case, it's called group 1, but if you want, you can just rename the group here. So let's select group 1. And now you can see we have our 2 circles here. So now you can see we have these 2 circles, and the idea is to remove them and create a center point for each individual circle here. So to do that, you can use a for each connected pieces loop. So now you can do that, and you can add an attribute wrangles into the loop here. So here let's define our variables. So let's create a centroid point, so vector centroid, and this one is equal to 0 for each axis. Now let's create a variable for the total points of our geometry. So let's add a int num points is equal to n.0 for the first input. So in that case, we have all the points stored in this variable here. So now let's start by creating a first loop. So the first loop is to calculate the centroid. So let's type for int e is equal to 0, e is lower than num points, and e++ to iterate. So now let's store the position of each point on the centroid. And we can close our first loop. So now let's divide our centroid with our num point. So let's add centroid divide equal num point. So now let's remove all the primitive for our line here. So let's type int num prim is equal to n primitive of our first input. And here let's create another loop to remove all those primitives. So let's type for int e equal 0. E is lower than num prim and e plus plus. So now we can create our conditions. Now we can open the curly bracket here and we can add the function called remove prim. And here with the remove prim, you can just type 0 for the first input. And here we can type e and 0. And we can do absolutely the same, but this time for the points. So let's add another for loop. And here we can type int e is equal to 0. E is lower than num points. And e plus plus. And we can open the curly brackets. And here we can just add the function called remove points. Remove points, and here we can type 0 for the first input, and here we can type e, and we can close this one and close the curly bracket here. And now to add a point to the center of the line here, we can add the function called add point. And here for this one, we can just type 0 for the first input, and we can use the centroid. And now you can see we have these 2 points created into the center of our 2 circles here. And now we can add a fuse to fuse all the points together. Now we can add a sort node. And here with the sort node, in my case, I will sort based on the x-axis. So here we can just change the point sort to x. And now the idea is to copy a line into the first point here. So we have the first point on the top here. But we have created 2 points because the second point is here to create a direction for the first point. So in that case, the line will be correctly placed into the center of our tube. So here we will copy the line into the first point, and we will define a direction for the first point with the help of the second point here. So let's do that with an attribute wrangles. So here with the attribute wrangles, we have only 2 points. So we have point 0 and point 1. So here we can just define 2 integers. So int pt0 is equal to 0 and int pt1 is equal to 1. So now we can create a group with the point 0 inside. So to do that, you can use a function called setPointGroup. And here for this one, we can use 0 for the first input. And here we can define a name for your group. So maybe we can use something like point 0 group. And here we can type pt0 and 1. And now we have created a group for the point 0. So now let's get the position of the 2 points. So let's type vector pos 0 is equal to points 0 p for the position attribute, and here we can type pt0. And now we can do absolutely the same for the second point, which is point 1. So let's type vector pos 1 is equal to point functions 0 for the first input, p for the position attribute, and here we can type pt1. So now we have the position of the 2 points here, and now we can calculate our directions. So to do that, we can use a vector dir, for example, and here we can just use the normalize functions, and we can just make pos 1 minus pos 0. So we can subtract the vector pos 1 with the vector pos 0, and here we can close this one, and we can set point attributes. Set point attribute, and here we can type 0 for the first input of the attribute wrangles here, and we can type n for the normal attributes. We can type pt0. Here we can type dir for our direction vector created here, and we can type set. And now we can close that. And now we can visualize the normal attribute created for the first point with this attribute wrangles by clicking on these icons. And now you can see we have our normal attribute on the first point pointing into the direction of the second point. So in that case, we can create a line perfectly aligned with our tube. So this is absolutely perfect. So now we can remove our second point. So let's add an attribute wrangles. And here for this one, it will be really simple. So you can just type int pt1 1 is equal to 1. And here we can just use remove points. And we can remove our second point. So let's type pt1 and you can close that. So now you can see we have only 1 point here with the normal attribute on it. And the second point was here only to create the direction attribute for the line later. So now we have that, so we can just select all those nodes, click on A and make them align. So now we can just select everything here, Alt and left click, and you can make them here and also here. And you can plug the group into this one, the group into this one, and now you can just replace the group name into the edge group to curve. So here instead of group 1 is group 2, and this one is group 3. So now we have everything, so let's add a merge node. Select all the attribute wrangles here, plug them into the merge. And here into the merge we have our 3 points here with the normal attribute like this. So now we can add a copy to point node. So let's add a copy to point. Let's plug the point into the second input and let's add a line. So here for the line, we can make it like this and we can add a resample node. So in that case, we can create a bit more points on our line because for now we have only those points. So with the resamples, we can change the length to something like 0.0025. We can add a curve view attribute and here we can hide the points and we can make this one into the first input of the copy to points. And here we can click on this one and you can see it's not correctly aligned because we need to go into the line and we need to define the direction to Z instead of Y. So we can put 0 here and we can put 1 here. And now we can see we have our tube here and we have our line here. So you can see it's perfectly aligned. So now let's specify this is the output of our line. So we can add a null. Let's rename it something like line and let's add a point up. And here we can create some noise on those line. So to do that, it's quite easy. So we can dive into the point up here. We can add an add node. So here we can add some noise into our position. So let's add a turbulent noise. Let's plug the position into the position here, plug the position into the first input, and let's plug the noise into the second input. So here we can plug that into the positions. And now we can visualize our point VOP. And now you can see our line goes absolutely crazy. So here we can go back into the point VOP. Here into the turbulent noise, you can change from 1D noise to 3D noise. And here you can change the noise type to 0 centered Perlin noise. And now we need to define the position of our noise based on our lines. And to do that, we have our curve view attribute. So here we can use a curve view attribute to define where we want to place the noise. So let's add a bind node. Let's import our curve view here. So curve view. Let's add a ramp. And here let's add a multiply node to multiply our noise with our attribute here. So let's plug the ramp into the second input of the multiply. And now you can replace the second input of the add node with the output of the multiply here. And here for the ramp, you can just change from RGB to spline ramp. And now you can go into the sub level here and you can go into the point VOP and here you can just define the ramp. So in that case, we can create some noise based on the curve view attribute. And here you can also go into the point VOP. You can click on the turbulent noise, right click, and here you can go into Vex VOPs options and you can click on create input parameters. So now you can go back into the subs and you have all the parameters of the noise right here. So in my case, I will put the frequency to 1.18. I will change the offset to 29.84. And here I will decrease the roughness to 0. And here I will just change the curve. And maybe I will go for something like this. So in that case, I don't have any noise into the interior parts of our tube here. And we can make the noise starting from maybe something like this. So now we can select these two key here and we can change the interpolation to something like monotone cubic to get something more smooth. And here you can just refine a bit here. So we need to avoid getting some intersection between our line and our tube. So this is the idea and maybe we can go for something like this. And now we can play with the frequency and we can also play with the offset if you want. So yeah, maybe I can change the offsets maybe. And I can increase a bit the amplitude and maybe we can go for something like this. And here you have to find a cool pattern for your line. So maybe I will go for something like this for this tutorial, so I don't want to spend too much time to find a good pattern here, but you can just play with frequency and the offset here. So now let's add a smooth node. Here with the smooth, we can increase the strength to something like 50, for example. Here we can add a resample node one more time, because I think we will get too much geometry into the sweep if we have all those points, so I think we can reduce it just a bit. So maybe we can go for something like 0.005. I think it will be enough. And here we can just click on subdivision curve. So I think it's good like that. So now let's add a sweep node. And here with the sweep, you can just select the round tube here, and you can just define your profile with a curve here. So here in my case, I will increase the column number to something like 16, and I will change the radius to 0.02. And here you can click on apply scale along curve, and here you can define your own profile. So I think you can go maybe for something like this, and here you can go for something way thinner into the end. So you need to be focused on the camera view here. And of course, you can make your own adjustment here based on your geometry. You can select all the points. And here you can click on B-spline. So I think it will be good. So I think I will go for something like this. So you can see it's a bit more thin into the interior parts of our geometry. Then we have something a bit more thick into the beginning, and we have something a bit more thin at the end here. So I think the shape is quite good like this. So of course you can make your own shape, and you can tweak it as you want, because this setup is fully procedural. So now we can add a subdivide node to add a bit more geometry into it. So maybe we can keep it the depth at 1. Now we need to isolate the different parts of our geometry here. So to do that, you can add a connectivity node. Here the connectivity node will create a class attribute, and we can use this class attribute to just separate our different lines. So here we can put the class attribute into primitive, and here we can add a blast node one more time. So here for the blast node, we can type @class == 0. We can click on delete non-selected. We can copy and paste it. Here we can replace the 0 with 1, and we can replace the 1 with 2 for the last one. And now we have our 3 lines separated here. So here on the sweep node, don't forget to click on endcap type here to single polygon if you want, because we will convert our geometry into VDB just later, so you need to close your geometry into the sweep here. So now we have our line here, and we need to merge the line with the inner parts of our tube here. So we have the inner part removed at this point of the node here. So here I can click on delete non-selected to get only the tube. So here this is the node for the tube, but we need to merge the inner part of each tube with the line here. So to do that, you can just copy paste the blast node created here. So these 3, so I will make them in green. So I can copy and paste it, the first one, the second one, and the third one. And here we just need to invert the selection here. So you can click on delete non-selected, same for this one, delete non-selected, and same for this one, delete non-selected. So now we can add 1 merge, 2 merge, and 3 merge. So now let's merge everything together. So we have the middle part here, and we have, I think the middle part is this one. So we have the top part here, the top part is this one, and we have the bottom part here, and the bottom part is this one. So now we can visualize the inner part of the geometry with the first line, the second one, and the third one. So now we can convert that into VDB. So let's do for the first one, and then we can copy paste for the 2 other. Let's add the VDB from polygon. And here for this one, we can change the voxel size to something like 0.0005. So it's quite high res, but the scale of the scene is not really big. So here we can go with low value into the voxel size. So now we can use the VDB smooth SDF. Here with the VDB smooth, we can make it into Gaussians. And here we can just add the convert VDB node. And here we can add another VDB smooth. This time we can keep the operation to mean value. And now we can add the convert VDB, and we can convert our VDB back to polygon. So here you can change this one to polygons. And here you can add a null to specify this is the output of our middle fluids. And here you can rename it something like render mid fluids, and do absolutely the same for the top and the bottom part. And here you can rename it something like render bottom fluid, and this one render top fluid. So now we have everything here. So now let's create our rendering scenes. So let's start by creating a render node for each individual tube here. So let's select the first one, Ctrl C, and here you can click on Ctrl Shift and V. So I can do that because I have the Audio Tool plugins. So the Audio Tool is here, but if you don't have the plugin, you can just create a geometry node, and here you can add an object merge, and you can merge your null into the object one here. So this is for the middle tube. Let's do absolutely the same for the top tube. Ctrl C, Ctrl Shift and V. And for the bottom one, Ctrl C, Ctrl Shift and V. And absolutely the same for the fluids. So let's select this one, Ctrl C, Ctrl Shift and V. And for the top, Ctrl C, Ctrl Shift and V. And for the last one, Ctrl C, Ctrl Shift and V. So now you can select all this one. You can put the geometry in one color, for example, so we can choose yellow. And for the fluid part, we can select, for example, purples. So now we have all this geometry, and here you can go into the geometry object here, you can go into the Redshif tag, and here into the render you can add an object ID, so you can put 1 for the first one, 2 for the second one, 3 for the third one, and so on. So in that case you can use this different object ID in After Effects on any composition software to create some color correction based on each individual part here. So it's very, very versatile and very powerful if you have to correct some colors and stuff like that. So I recommend you to make something like this. So now you have your camera. So if you want, you can always find another position for your camera. So here you can select your camera, you can click on these icons, and you can change the position if you want. So maybe for something like this or this. And if you don't want to get these little things here to affect your camera, you can right click here and you can click on disable anchor orientation handles, and here you can just find another position. So maybe I will go for something like this, move a bit like that, and I think it's quite good for these tutorials. So now let's add the material networks, and here you can rename it RS Matte, and now we can dive into the lighting and the shading of our scenes. So now let's start by creating a background, because for now we don't have anything. So to do that, let's add new geometry nodes. Here we can rename it something like render backgrounds. And here we can dive inside, we can add a grid. So here for the parameter of my grid, I will change the size to something like 16 and 30 here. I will change the rows to 100 and 100. So the grid is quite large because we have a wide angle camera, so we need to create quite large background here. So now let's add a normal node. Here let's add a bend. And here for the bend, I can change the bend value here to 90 degrees. And here I can change the origin to something like -2.5. And here I can add a transform node to place the background correctly into my scenes. And here I can just change the position of my backgrounds. Can put the value on the rotate on the y-axis to 180 degrees, and here we can place it as you need. So I think we can go for something like that for now. Let's add a material swap node, and here let's add a subdivide node, and let's add a null to specify this is the end of our background, so we can rename that what render. Now we can go back into the object, into my material here. I've imported the 3 material for the tube. So I will dive inside and I will show you how it works. So I've made the texturings of the tube in Substance Painter. So here I have the texture set. So I have base color, metallic, roughness, translucency, normals, and 8. So it's just the same material for each individual colorways here with different base colors and also normals and 8 for the label here. But yeah, basically it's the same material for each individual colorways here. So I think it's not really interesting to spend too much time into this one because it depends on your own geometry. So yeah, this is the material for my geometry here, and I have the material for my background. So this is the material I've used. So you can see it's basic material with a roughness value at 0.8, and here I have changed the color to this one, so quite brown with little red tint. And of course, you can change the color if you want. So now you can go back into the object level, and later we'll see the material for the liquid, but for now, let's keep it as it is. So now we can go back into the object, and we can assign the materials to the different object of the scene here. So let's start maybe with the background. We can go here, and we can assign the background material into this one by clicking on these icons, RS Matte, and here background. So now we can do the same for the tube. So we can go into the middle tube, we can add material subnode. And here for this one, I will use a material called Summer Friday Cherry. And here we can add a null, and we can call it render. So now we can copy these two nulls, Control C, we can go into the second tube, Control V, and we can just replace the material for this one, and this one will be the vanilla beige. Here we can go back into object, do the same for the last tube, and for the last one, we can use the brown sugar material. So now we can go into the fluid, copy and paste, and we can replace the materials. So for the fluid here, we can use the liquid cherry. Now let's dive into the second one, which is top fluid. So here for the top, I will use the vanilla beige fluid. So it's this one, liquid vanilla beige. And for the last one, I will use the brown sugar. So here you can just replace the material with a liquid brown sugar. So now we have everything set correctly for the materials. Now let's dive into the first part of the lightning. So for the first part of the lightning, we can use an RS dome. And here for the RS dome, I will use a dome I use all the time. So here you can click on light, and you can import your textures. So here into $text, I have my different texture for the lightning. And here I will use that one. So I use this one all the time. And here you can just change the color space to this one. You can decrease the saturation to 0. And here you can remove it from our environment and viewports. So now I can open my render view. So I can click on Windows, New Floating Panel. And here I can open my Redshift render view. So for now I have this result. And the idea of the lightning here is to create a direction from the top left to the bottom right for the eyes. So here we can create some kind of high gradient into the middle of our part here. So in that case, we can create more highlight into the fluid part and more dark part into the top here. So in that case, the eyes will be attracted to the composition of our tubes into the bottom right here. So for the first light dome here, we need to create some global lightning, but we need to make it very soft. So here I can decrease the exposure to -1. And maybe we can change the rotations on the y-axis here for the light dome to create some kind of highlight into the side parts of our tube here. So we can make the value at something like -200. So for now we have that. So now we can create a light for our background. So to create this kind of gradients here. So to do that, you can add another RS light. So here for this RS light, we can make it very close to the background here. So we can make it something like this. We can change the shape to disk, and here we can change the size maybe to 2 and 6, or maybe 6 and 3, something like that. We can change the rotations of our lights, and you can change the positions to something like this. We can decrease the intensity to maybe something like 10 for now. And here we can decrease the spread to create very high contrast here to something like 0.5. And here we can increase the size to 4, maybe 4 and 8, something like that. So now we can change the positions of our lights to maybe something like this. Of course, you can always change the spread and the size if you want, but I think we can go for something like this as a base. So now we can create another light. And this light will be here to create some highlight into the side of our tube here. So we can make it pause, and we can place the light correctly. So here the light will affect everything except our background. So here you can go into the object, you can enable this one, and you can enable the light for everything except the background. So you can type this, and you can put your background object here. So make sure you have the same name into the background and into the object excluded here. So for the settings of the light, we can make it very soft to something like 1.5 or 2, for example. Here we can change the shape to disk, and we can change the size to 4 and 6, for example, and we can change the spread to 0.8. So now let's place it correctly. So we can go into the RS Light view. So we can go into the RS Light 2, and we can click on the little lock icon here, and we can make it into the scene like this as a backlight, so we can enable the render view here. And yes, I think something like this is quite cool for the highlight into the tube here, but later we can always add a bit more light. So now let's add another light dome, so RS light dome. So for this second dome light here, I will use a texture from Grayscale Gorilla, so it's called Pro Metal Studio Volume 2 0.8, so here you can select the texture, IP text, and in my case it's called Metal Vol 2 0.8, so that one you can put into sRGB. And here you can just keep everything by default. Only for the object we can enable the light for everything except the background, like for this. So we can copy that, Control C, and paste into this one. And here we can disable every light here. So you can put into off. So in that case, we can be more focused into this specific light dome. So we can click on enable into the render view. And here we can find a cool position for this light dome. So in my case, I will put the value into the negative part to maybe -100 or something like this. Yeah, I think it's quite good. So in that case, we have a bit more light into our tube and our fluid, so we can enable everything else. Click on. And now we can see we have something more bright for the tube here. It's quite good. So now what we can do, we can add another light for this part of the tube, to create some highlight into the left part of the tube. So for this one, and this one. So we can add a light for each individual tube here. So to do that, let's add another RS light. So for the settings of the light here, we can just decrease the intensity to something like 2. Here we can change the shape to disk, and we can change the shape to 1 and 2.5. So in that case, we can get this kind of shape here. For the contribution, we can enable the light only for diffuse and reflections, and we can remove for everything else. So we can remove for transmissions, scattering, multi-scattering, GI, and volume. So now we have this light only for diffuse and reflection. And here for the object, we can select, for example, the first tube. So we can select this one, Control C. And here we can go into objects, and you can just enable the light for this object. So in that case, only the middle object will be affected with this light. So now we can find a cool position for the light. So we can click on this. And you have to put the light as a backlight. So here we can just change it like this and like this. So yeah, now you can see on the middle tube we have some highlight here. So we can duplicate this light, but this time for another tube. So we can select this one, for example. And here we can just replace the enable light here, Control V. And here we can just change the position of the light for the top tube. So here I will make it more into the right. More like this. So maybe we can disable all the lights here into the viewport. So I think it will be a bit more clear for the lightning. And here we can go a bit more close to our geometry. And here we have a nice highlight here. So we can do absolutely the same for the last tube. So we can select this one, Control C. We can replace it here, Control V. And now we can change the position of the light one more time. So this time for the last tube. We can change, of course, the rotations as you need. So yeah, maybe something like this. And like this will be enough. So maybe I will decrease a bit the intensity for this one. So instead of 2, I will go for 1 maybe 1.5. And now we have everything. So we can enable all the light here, and everything is enabled. And now we can add another light, but this time for the fluid, because I think the fluid looks a bit flat for now. So we can add a bit of highlight into the left part here. So maybe we can copy this light, and here into the object we can select the object we want to affect with the light. So we want to affect the bottom fluid, middle fluid, and top fluid. So we can click on accept. And here into the light we can change the intensity to something like 4. For the shape, we can keep it as a disk, and we can change the size to something like 2 and 3, for example. And here for the contribution, we can just keep everything as it is, but for the multiple scattering, we can put it at 0.5. So in that case, it will affect a bit the SSS on our fluids. And here we can just try to find a good position for these lights. So maybe we can go like this. And we can maybe remove all the light for now, click on off. So in that case, we can be more focused into this one. And I think we can create nice highlight here. Maybe we can decrease the intensity to 3 instead of 4. And I think it's quite good. Maybe we can change the spread to something like 0.5. Maybe 0.6. And I think it's quite good. So now let's enable all the lights. And I think it looks quite nice. So maybe I will increase the intensity of this one to maybe 4. Yeah, I think it's good. So now we have the light for the global lightning and the tube here. So we can put them into the same color. So maybe purples. So we have the light for the backlight of the tube here to the left side. So we can put them into green. And this one is for the highlight of the fluid here. And I think it's pretty much it for the lightning. So now I will show you the materials of my scene. So here into the RS mat, I have my background. So I've already shown you how it's look. Of course, you can change the color. So in my case, the color is quite dark, a bit of red or pink. So in that case, we can get this kind of gradients, perfectly match with the different projects here. And we have the light here. Of course, you can always tweak the color if you want in post-productions, and you can tweak the intensity of the light if you want to get more or less white value here into this part. But yeah, the background material is quite really easy. And for the liquid, we can go into this one, for example. We have very basic material here. And I have decreased the reflection to 0.1. And here I have enabled the subsurface. So I've put the weight to 1. And I've changed the scale to very low value. So of course you can make it a bit more high if you want. It depends on the material of your product, of course, but in my case I think it's quite good like that. And for the radius I make it something a bit more dark than the initial color here, but the color depends also on your own product, of course, so you need to adjust the color based on your product. So I think it's pretty much it for the materials. So for the different liquid material is absolutely the same, so just with different color into the subsurface here based on the product's colors. But yeah, it's quite easy in terms of materials. But yeah, the lighting feel very nice with the composition of the scenes and with the wide angle camera. So I think it's quite good. So maybe we can disable all the light for now. And we can see the results of our scenes. And we can enable the light one by one. So we have the first light here, which is global lighting. The second one for the background. The third one for the highlight into the right part of our tubes. The second light dome for a bit more brightness into our tube. So if you want, you can always increase this parameter if you want to get a bit more light, maybe 0.5 for example. So this light will add some highlight into the left part of the tube. So this one first for the red tube, this one for the top tube, and the last one for the bottom tube. And now we have the light for the fluid here to create some highlights. And if you want, you can enable or disable the scattering here to 0 or 1 if you want. So yeah, in my case, I think 0.5 works quite good for this one. So now I will show you my render setting for this still. So here you can see I have my Redshif drop. For the output, I can keep it as it is here. I can just change from 16-bit to 32, and I will render it as EXR to make the compositing in After Effects. So here into the AOVs, I can add diffuse, specular, refractions, GI. We can also add a path for our subsurface scattering. And I think it's pretty much it. Now we can add a puzzle mat. So we can rename that one puzzle mat 1, and we can add another one for puzzle mat 2 and puzzle mat 3 for the background. Puzzle mat 3. So now we can change that to object ID 1, 2, 3. So here we can change it to puzzle mat 2, and here we can change to object ID 4, 5, and 6, and this one to object ID 7, 8, 9. So that's good. Now we can go into Redshift, we can go into Advanced. Here we can make the threshold very low because I will render only one stills, but of course for animation you have to tweak this parameter. So here I will make the value at 128 to 2048, for example, and I can override refraction to maybe 4096, and same for the scattering. 4096, and same for this one. Now I don't render with motion blur. For the global here I will increase to 20, 10, and 10. And now for the GI I can put this one into brute force 1024, and here I can increase the system to 512, and I think it's pretty much it. So now click on play, and we can see the result of our final rendering. So now we can just press render to disk and it will render this frame to your disk. So that's it for today, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. See you in the next one. Bye.